very good morning to each and every one of you. Indeed, I'm very thrilled, and I must say that technology is great. Now, our English A examination is around the corner, and you all know that it's on the 5th of May. Today, we want to focus on some tips and points that can really aid in your performance. So we will go through over a couple of days, we will go through the paper and look at the mark scheme and try to boil the knowledge that we have. You all, I guess, have looked at the question paper before. But today, we are going to focus on the short story. I have selected a short story because this is the question I would like you to do first in the examination room. The short story I would like you to do first. It's section C. And some people are so programmed that they would rather do A, B, C, and D. But for the full effect and efficiency, I would like you to do the short story first. It's the longest question. It's 400 to 450 words, as you know. And when you're fresh in the examination room, perhaps it's best that we tackle that question and get that question out of the way. As you know, we're allotted 4 to 5 minutes for that question. And it's the only section that we have a choice. We have a choice. So we have the picture stimulus, and we have the second question where you have to use some phrases and words to write the story. I know that you're okay with all of this, but we're just going this over as a revisionary process. So in the short story, we will have a picture stimulus. And you'll be asked to write a story based on that picture. From the get-go, I want you to remember that it's not a descriptive piece where you're just looking at this picture and describing it. For that, you'll get 0. We have to write a story with the elements of story writing coming out there. If perchance we do not like the picture stimulus, then we can use the other stimulus to write the story. Whatever we use, whether it's the picture stimulus or the other one, our story must be no less than 400 words. We are asked to write approximately 400 to 450. So we are not going to write under 400. We were working for 5 years on this syllabus, so I know that you have done stories before. I know that you wrote stories. I know that you tried to reach the word limit, but today we are going to remind ourselves. Now, I want to read a short story for you that was adjudged the best short story in the year it was written. And I'm reading this to you so that you can be clear in your minds the length that is required and the quality of the story. The length and the quality. After we will have read the story, we're going to talk some more. But this story that I will read is from a student, of course, who wrote many years ago. And the stimulus was, write a story based on this question. The phone rang once and stopped. It rang again. This was it now. Write a story which includes these words. So let me go over the stimulus. The phone rang once and stopped. It rang again. This was it now. Needless to say that we have over 100,000 students who write the May-June English examination. And many students will choose the picture stimulus, many students will choose the other one. But as I said before, no matter what you choose, we must satisfy the requirements. So I'm going to read the story that CSEC believes is a top-of-the-line story. So I want you to listen carefully. Beads of sweat slowly trickled down my face. The numbing feeling of guilt stealthily creeping up my spine. I sat in my Western-looking living room on the cowboy-patterned sofa, shaking from head to toe. The dingy brown the room had been painted seemed nauseating at the moment. Or was it the fact that the walls of the room seemed to be closing in on me? I wish they would, I thought. My mind drifted to 2 hours earlier that day in my classroom. Life seemed less complex then. Come on, Suzanne. There is no one here. Why can't you just once kiss me? My boyfriend Zach pleaded desperately with me, getting more agitated with each second that was added to his wait. My eyes admiringly drank him in from head to toe. What was wrong with me, I thought? Zach was expertly molding in every way possible. And yet I found it so hard to indulge in anything with him physically because of fear of being caught. His caramel brown skin seemed to seep all over him. He was tall with full, luscious pink lips, breathtaking glassy black eyes, and curly dark hair. The desire in his eyes drew me in like a fisherman reeling in his catch. Zach, you know physical contact at school is forbidden, and my parents have a lot to do with my not doing anything with you. If I were caught, I would not bear to face their anger and disappointment. I know, Suzanne, but we've been together for 3 months. I'm sure this one time wouldn't hurt. And I promise we won't get caught. I looked up at him questioningly, praying for the Lord to restore my sense of judgment as I was on the verge of surrendering to him. As though sensing my wavering in thought, Jack leaned over onto my chair and placed his nose directly on mine. The scent of flower-scented soap softly caressed my nostrils. Mixed with the baby powder smell, it seemed of his youthful perfection. My heart hammered against my ribcage, almost arresting the air which tried in vain to enter my body. I leaned in towards him and shakily pressed my lips against his. "What are you doing?" A loud, accusing male voice came crashing between Zach and me. I froze. Susan James and Zachary Elliott. "This is totally unbelievable," the voice continued. I turned reluctantly to face a tall, dark man clad in a gray suit with a repulsive tie staring angrily at me. It was Mr. Forbes, our school principal. I started to say. I was, however, interrupted by Mr. Forbes. "Head home now, the two of you, and wait for me to call your parents." The phone rang once and stopped. It rang again. This was it now. Like an alarm clock, all my nerves spiraled my body into an unhealthy vibration. My mind was jogged back to reality. I could taste the breakfast I had eaten that morning re-entering my mouth. "Susan?" "Huh?" I replied, completely out of touch with everything. Answer the phone, my mother bellowed from the kitchen. My stomach rotated 360 degrees and knotted in a terrible bow. The phone kept ringing. Susan, Susan, Susan. My mind seemed to be playing tricks on me. The voice which kept calling my name seemed to be transforming into that of a male's. A hand tenderly rested on my shoulder and gently shook it. Susan, are you okay? I turned to look at my inquirer, and to my surprise, I was staring right into Zach's face. The school bell was ringing uncontrollably. Susan, I just asked you if you'd kiss me, and you totally zoned out for about 5 minutes. Aren't you going to answer me? I don't think we should do that just yet. I have a funny feeling about the outcome. But Susan, he started. I know, but I'm not ready, I interrupted. Okay, I respect that, he replied. I'll wait. Quite to my surprise, I hadn't expected this response. We got up from our desks and walked towards the door. I was finally able to breathe. Thank God it was just a daydream, I thought. So, that is Miss Grace Ann's short story in the year that she wrote. And if we look at the story, we will recognize right away that the story ended in a twist. The story ended in a twist. And so that is one way we can end our story. As we look at ending our story in a twist, our story must still be credible, and we must accept the ending as a true reflection of the story. Sometimes we can end our story in a twist. Sometimes we can use the flashback method. Sometimes we can do the simple narration. But whatever we do, we must hold the reader's interest. I would like to ask you many questions, but because of our microphone switching on and off, I will not ask you questions at this point, except when I'll ask you if you have questions to ask, and we'll deal with those. But as we listen to this story, we realize the quality of stories we have to write. Some people might be saying, oh my God, I can't write that. You don't have to write this, but we must satisfy the requirements. And what are the requirements? What are the requirements as we write our story? In a nutshell, and of course we're doing everything in a capsule this morning as we're capturing the importance of the short story and the important elements that we need to understand. When we think of our story, we think of our story in 3 parts, perhaps. The beginning, the middle, and the end. The beginning, the middle, and the end. As we look at this story, what's the beginning? Beads of sweat slowly trickled down my face, the numbing feeling of guilt stealthily creeping up my spine. I sat in my Western living room, so we were introduced here to our character. So we can begin our story using a character. In this story, a character is introduced. We can begin our story with a setting, because our story must take place somewhere. We can begin our story with a question. But however we begin our story, students, we must remember that we must begin with a bang. We must gain the reader's interest at first. We must gain the reader's interest. As the reader reads the first couple lines, the reader must become very, very interested and will be propelled to read the rest. always begin the story with a bang. Not very boring beginnings. We must try to avoid beginning our story with, "It was a cold, dark night, one bright summer day." Those beginnings are stock beginnings, overused. We will not begin our story with "once upon a time," because the days for our fairy tales are over. So our stories must be credible, no once upon a time. We begin with a bang. I was examining two stories, and I was looking at the beginning of the stories. Both candidates wrote on the story entitled "The Race." And the first candidate, the opening lines: "I woke early that morning, said my prayers, had breakfast, took a shower, and went to the stadium." Again, "I awoke early that morning, said my prayers, had breakfast, took a shower, and went to the stadium." As we listen to that, we realize that that is not a very exciting beginning. That is not beginning with a bang. And so a story like that could continue in that pedestrian way, in that very ordinary way, and lead to a very dull story. And if we're not able to excite and entertain and sustain the excitement for the examiner, we'll end up with a grade that we will not like. The other student wrote for the same story entitled "The Race." "Get to your marks." The starter boomed over the microphone, and the air was filled with electric silence. "Get to your marks." The starter boomed over the microphone, and the air was filled with an electric silence. Right away, we recognize that this story begins with a bang. The starter boomed over the microphone. Boomed, that word, boomed, puts us in the mood. And the air was filled with electric silence. Why was the air filled with it? Who was it taking part in this sport today? Was it Usain Bolt? Who was it? But we can see the difference. So we must begin our story with a bang so that we can gain the reader's interest and we can set the tone for our story. Again, I said however we begin, if we begin with a setting, if we begin by introducing a character, if we begin by posing a question, however we begin, we must begin with a bang. Some students tend to want to begin with a bright sunny day, one Saturday morning. No, as we say, those are doom stories, and the examiners will not be pleased. We can begin also by introducing the character. We can begin by stating the conflict. Mind you that a conflict is necessary. If we do not have a conflict, we do not have a story. You may remember as you interact with students and your friends would call you, come, I have a story to tell you. And if they call you and tell you something very boring or something very silly, you will not be pleased. That's why you call me to tell me that's any story. So our story must have the conflict. And as we build and we go on to the middle, we try to develop more, to add suspense, to keep the conflict going, and take the story up. Long ago, we used to talk about the rising action, the falling action, and so on. We don't really have to remember rising action and falling action and so on. We just know that we keep the conflict going. We introduce suspense. Suspense is necessary. Suspense is necessary. As we read just now with Zach and Suzanne, the suspense was whether they're caught now And what will the parents do? Thank God it was just a daydream, so there was that twist. So Suzanne wasn't in trouble, and Suzanne learned what can happen to her, and so she will not go down that road. So when we introduce our conflict, we have to resolve the conflict before the end of our story. So as we come down to ending our story, we must resolve our conflict. Now, students, I want you to remember, your teachers have told you already, but I just want to reinforce here now that your conflict doesn't have to be happily ever after. When we were young and we read all our fairy tales, and we read our Snow White and our Cinderella and all the other stories, the conflict resolved, and we were always with a happy ending, happily ever after. In this conflict here, Susan knew that her parents were very strict in school, no physical touching with any boy, kiss or otherwise holding hands, and that the conflict was introduced here. It was resolved through Susan's daydream that's off limits, and so that was resolved. It wasn't a happily ever after resolution for Zach, but it was resolved. So as we write our stories and we try to resolve our conflicts, we recognize that our conflicts can be resolved. Somebody might not get the desired effect, somebody might die, somebody might not die, somebody might win some great money, somebody might pass an examination, one might not pass the examination, but the conflict will be resolved. Now, how do we achieve our 400 to 450 words? It's by practice. It's by practice. I'm sure that with your teachers, you have written some stories before, but we have another 2 weeks and a half, or a little, nearly a month. And in that time, we can practice about 2 more stories, and we could allow our teachers to look at the stories, look at any strengths, look at any weakness, and help us. But I want you to remember that if you write too short a story, you will not be able to get the 25 marks. You will not be able to get the 25 marks. If you write too long a story, you'll have a problem also. Some students get carried away and they write about 600 or 700 words. You'll be penalizing yourself. How so? You'll be penalizing yourself because you will not be able to finish the paper because you'll spend too much time with that one question. So we have to get the balance. Remember, I said that you are going to do this first because it's the longest paper, and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do second, third, and so on. But we are going to do a story first. We have to look at our instructions carefully. Sometimes you might hear your instructions being referred to as the rubric. We must spend the time looking at our instructions. I, from experience, have seen very intelligent students, very bright students, if we may use that word, go into examinations and mess up not because they didn't have the knowledge, but they did not pay attention to the instructions. Let us look at what section C asks of us. Section C, that is a short story. So as you go into the examination, you are going to leave A and leave B and start with section C. And the suggested time is 45 minutes. As I said, it is a practice that we're going to get that. So you have to practice now. And the instruction says, you must answer one, and one is underscored there, one question from this section. I was told from time to time that some teachers would encourage the students to write both questions, and the CSEC will mark both questions, and give you the higher marks. That will be foolish because you will not finish the paper. And when you come down to your to do the expository piece, you will not be finished, and so you throw away 25 marks. Mind you, class, in this examination, you are trying to get 79 marks. As you know from your SBAs, 79%. From your SBAs, you already got 21%. How much out of that you are able to score? So in this examination, we are fighting for 79%. So you're lucky because you had the opportunity of getting 21%. Let us continue with the rubric. You write your answer. Let's go back to the rubric. Write your answer on rule pages provided. So they have pages 14 to 17. And you might say, look, we have to write on pages 14 to 17, and Miss is telling us to do this first. Yes, do it first and find in the booklet, find pages 14 to 17. You are expected to write within the word limit, within. So when you go to 500 and 600 words, the examiners get cross. They get cross. So they're telling about more space and so on. You'll see a lot of space. Don't try to fill in everything. And whatever scrap work you do and plan, there, that will not be marked. You must write in standard English. Now it's an English examination class, and you must write in standard English. However, in this section only, and this is the only section that some dialect may be tolerated, but the dialect will have to be in conversation, which I'm sure your teachers already told you that will be in dialogue, and that dialogue will have to be in quotation marks. As I go through the mark scheme, I'm going to stress more on dialogue. In your answer, you'll be assessed on how well you use the stimulus provided. So they're telling you how well you use the stimulus. If you have the picture and you just describe this picture, you see like it's a garden, and the garden is tended or not tended because it looks a bit clumpy and bushy. No. You're writing a story, but your story will include this picture. It will include this picture. So the stimulus, and whether you're writing the one where you have to just add the words as the one that we just read, then you will do the same. Develop and organize the content of your writing. Use language appropriate to your audience, purpose, and content. Use appropriate grammar, sentence structures, paragraphs, vocabulary, spelling, and punctuation. So I am just running this over because as we discuss the mark scheme, we're going to go in detail with each one. In discussing the mark scheme, we will also recap everything that we have to do. So there we see we have two questions. We have a picture, and then the other one, if we go a little more, yes, write a story based on the sentence below. He was just about to give up when the unthinkable happened. He was just about to give up when the unthinkable happened. Now, if you're answering this question, you have to take into account the main word, the unthinkable. The unthinkable can't be that then he found his bag to go to school, or then he found his laptop cable. The unthinkable must be something that will shock the examiner. That will shock the examiner. But I've seen it, students. I've been an examiner and an assistant chief examiner and a table leader and so on, for more than 3 decades. And I've seen it all. People will take this same thing and write unthinkable is that they went and then they hide the food, and when they found it in the safe, and they just eat it out. And when he came home, the unthinkable happened. He didn't find it. I am telling you, I've seen it all. One year, we had a question, write a story based on the saying, monkey know which limb to climb on. In Guyana, people know it, the older folks know a monkey know which limb to climb on, that you know who to take advantage of. But in some countries like Jamaica, they never heard that saying, monkey know which limb to climb on. So that year you was exposed to monkey grandmother, monkey grandfather, monkey auntie, monkey uncle, monkey apple too. Because they did not know monkey know which limb to climb on. But since then, CSEC realized that these sayings are not known and they took them all out. So you're getting something strange, but the unthinkable. But I'm telling you, make sure that it is powerful. If you can't think of anything, then you go back to that story, that picture stimulus, and you write it. So, in addition to all that I've said, we're going to go through the mark scheme, and this will help us to recap what is necessary for a short story. So our technicians will help us to put the mark scheme up. Mark scheme. Yes. So here we have the mark scheme. 25 marks for this short story class. 25 marks. And this story will be marked holistically. Now they're looking at this story, and because it's a creative piece, they're assessing it for 25 marks. When we come to persuasive writing in our next class, we'll see that that's marked differently. But this is marked holistically. Look at it, read. But what are they looking for? What are the examiners looking for? And this criteria here that we're going through slowly this morning will help you as you're writing, because you are writing your story to be marked by this mark scheme. So the first area that they're looking for is content and relevance. And as I was just telling you about unthinkable and the relevance to the stimulus. Mind you, the stimulus is the topic, the relevance. Content and relevance, how related it is. And as they're looking at content and relevance, they're looking at the storyline, the plot. You must have heard your teachers telling you about the plot, the storyline, what is happening there, what they want of you from the storyline. They want the storyline to be clearly developed. So in 400 words, they want the storyline. They want to see that the events are linked appropriately. As I said before, there are different techniques that we can use, and whichever technique we choose, we have to stick to that technique, and all our links and so on must be appropriate. As I said, we have the technique, we have the flashback. Now, the flashback is a very lovely technique. But to use it, you have to remember what you have to do. You start your story at the end, and then you go back in time. You must go back in time, and then before you end, you come back to your beginning, which is where you started. Let's say that you're writing a story now. As I awoke on the hospital bed, the smell was suffocating me. I shuddered. Why was I here? And so that's where you begin the story. Why was I here? And then you go back in time to the events that led you to be on the hospital bed. So, whether you couldn't remember at first, but the memories slowly came back, and that you went back in time to what brought you here, and you went through everything, whether you disobeyed your parents, and you stole the car, and you went for a drive, and you ended up in a ditch, whatever, and you come to the end of relating that story, you must come back to the hospital bed. You must come back to the hospital bed. So that's how we must remember our flashback. I know your teachers are there. I know your teachers told you. We are just going over this as a form of recapping for our big day on the 5th of May. I do not want to say this, but we know that English is singularly the most important subject. We cannot move on without passing English. We cannot move on, so we have to put our all into this. So yes, we say our storyline must be clearly developed. We must see the events unfolding. We talked about conflicts just now, and I said there is no story without the conflict. And I'm repeating it, there is no story, because they say that all of life revolves around conflict. Whether it's two groups, whether it's two individuals, whether it's man versus nature, all of life revolves around conflict. And it is said that man is most heroic when he's dealing with conflict. So it's very important for us to have our conflict, and more important, to have our conflicts or conflict, I would say, to keep our story simple and introduce one conflict. And so that as you write and you're in control of your story wouldn't run out on you. You would keep control of the story, of the emotions, of the characters and their emotions. You keep control. And so in the end, when you tie up, you have so many. If you have 3 concepts of conflict, then you'll have to tie up this one, tie up that one, tie up in 45 minutes. That's difficult. So I would write one and make sure that we keep controlling that and that it is satisfactorily resolved at the end. The actions in our stories, the incidents that we put together, remember it's incidents and events and so on that we put together, and they must be concluded. At the end, you must feel the sense of conclusion. As I said earlier, not necessarily happy ever after, but you must feel that sense of conclusion. As we read the story, we felt a sense of conclusion. Susan was no longer in that conflict of whether she was kiss her boyfriend's pink luscious lips. I don't know what pink lips he had, but that's what she wrote, pink luscious lips. And she was tempted. And that was the conflict, because the conflict was her parents would kill her. She knows that. Figuratively kill her. So she was torn between things. But in the end, she came to her senses, and that conflict was satisfactorily resolved. There was no doubt in the reader's mind, as there will be no doubt in the examiner's mind, that you have satisfactorily resolved the conflict. And all the actions and the incidents and so on must be resolved, and you come to a plausible end. When I say a plausible end, a believable end. Because remember that the short story is not a fairy tale, class. It's a credible piece of things that we can relate to in our own lives. So we are not going to write the story about somebody and the head got bitten off and the people stand and laugh. That's not plausible. That's not plausible. And we want something plausible, credible. And then the examiners will be looking for setting. The setting must be established. Some people write a whole story and nothing about where the story took place. Nothing about that. So we must have when and where and the place and sometimes the mood. For instance, in the story that we read, we know it took place in the classroom and in one point in her own living room when she was daydreaming. So we know the place. We know where it took place. We know when it took place. The action before the bell. And so it's clear in our minds. So our storyline and our plot. Our plot is the storyline that is held together with all the elements. And then we have characterization. Now characterization is very, very important. Our characters must be believable, credible. As I said, the days of the fairy tales, not now. Not now with Jack and the Beanstalk and the who wanted the giant and to devour the father, and no. The characters must be believable. Our neighbor, our friend, the people we see down the street, our teachers, whoever we choose. But they must be believable. They must act and use language that is consistent with who they are. If it's a beggar in the street, then it's the language of the beggar. If during the story that there's a change in the character's personality, let's say it was just a make-believe beggar. A beggar was just pretending to be a beggar to see the response. That's credible. That's not fairy tale. People could pretend I'm a poor boy, so let me see how this girl will react to me. To see if it's just a gold digger or is somebody with great emotions to me. So this person might pretend. So when he is a beggar, he must act like a beggar, he must speak like a beggar, he must behave like a beggar. But in the same story, if there is a change, when his real identity comes forth, then he must be changed. No more a beggar, whoever he is, we must see the change. Our characters must be sufficiently developed. Now I know, class, we are really pushing a lot into this, but you know all of this, and I am reminding you. Our characters must be sufficiently developed. And that is why in our stories, we don't put 12 characters. Even if we have 12 characters, some must be just flat characters. You know the difference between round and flat characters. The round characters are the ones that are developed and we can write a little character sketch about them. The flat ones are the ones that are just mentioned. So in our stories, we can put about two wrong characters. Like in this story, we had Zach and Susan. They were wrong characters because we could say something about them. We could write 5-6 lines about Zach and Susan, who Zach was, who Susan was. And so the characters must be sufficiently developed. We use just a few so that in our 400 to 450 words, we can develop them. If we put 6 characters as wrong characters, we're in trouble. So we decide as we get our story, right away we decide how many characters we're going to need. How many wrong characters we're going to need. Maybe 2. And so we develop them fully. Now, dialogue. As we think about characters, we think about dialogue. Let me stress something about dialogue. Dialogue, when used, should be functional. In other words, we're not just putting dialogue for dialogue's sake. Like somebody writing, and each dialogue must be in a new line with the quotation marks assigned. So we're not just going to write our story and say, "Hi, Tom," and then the next line, "Hi, John," and then, "How are you?" "Well, I'm not so good today." "Why are you not so good today?" "Well, I don't like the poached eggs that Mommy did." No, that's not functioning. It's not telling you, not forwarding your story. The dialogue, when used, must be functional. It must forward the action and the atmosphere of the story. Like the little dialogue we had along this Susan story. Each piece of dialogue meant something and developed the character more, the action and the atmosphere. Sometimes you could write a story with just few pieces of dialogue. Actually, I would encourage you not to write too many pieces of dialogue, because it can drag the story out. It can drag the story. So if you remember that the dialogue must be functional, it must play a role in the story, you'll get it and you'll understand that there is no need to write too many pieces. So we have our storyline there now, where we talk about everything, our conflict, our characters, our setting, main elements in story writing. Now, when we're planning our story and we are making the jottings before we write in our 45 minutes, now class, well I say class, students, we get 2.5 hours for the paper, plus 10 minutes, which will be counted. You get 10 minutes, 10 free minutes. And I am going to ask you to use those 10 free minutes to decide which story you're going to write, because this is the only section, as I said before, this is the only section that has a choice. Section A is one thing, you have to do the summary. Section B, one thing, you have to do the expository piece. And section D, the persuasive piece, one topic. So this section C is the only topic with a choice. So spend your 10 minutes looking at both and making up your mind. Don't start and scratch, because you will not be finished. Don't start, oh, I'm going to write this picture and halfway scratch it and do the other one. No. You use those 10 free minutes to decide which one you're going to do and start, put things in place. And you are going to come up with your conflict, with your characters, with your setting. You have to come up with all of that, because you're going to see how you're going to begin the story, how you're going to sustain the interest, and then how you're going to end the story. You have to tie everything up and leave the reader feeling very good. Just as how the reader must feel good at the beginning, the reader must feel better at the end, because it's at the end that the reader will put your mark. So they feel good at the beginning, they feel good as they go through, and better at the end. Better. So how you get your characters, you get your action, you get your conflict, you get your setting, you get everything. Now we have to organize. We have to organize. So we have our events, we have our incidents, we have all our details, and now we have to organize everything logically. And you know about logical thinking, because you need logical thinking for your summary, you need logical thinking for your persuasive, you need logical thinking for everything. So you organize now logically and effectively. How can you be efficient and effective? Now it brings in the question the language. Remember, it's an English language examination. So we have to pay attention to the effective use of language. The effective use of language. So here we look at the appropriate choice of words. So even as we are creating our characters, our atmosphere, and our setting, we have to look for the appropriate use of words. We have to look for economy, because remember, we are still in our 400 words. So how we can be economic with our use and still keep the language very lively. So we have to remember that. Effective and efficient use of language. Yes, so as we scroll up, what else are we going to look at there? We have to go and, yes, thank you. So we look at the correct use and structures of the language. Now, this is very important because it's an English examination. We can't just be in a slipshod manner and I know that students are saying now they don't like to read, or teachers are saying the students don't like to read, and that's why so many of us do not do English B, and that's a pity. But we have to know the structures of our language. You are going to be penalized for shoddy, slipshod, and work that we must have correct structures. So our sentences must be complete. And a sentence, our sentence begins with a capital letter, end with a full stop, and we must have a complete thought there. Our sentences can be long, our sentences can be short. Some short sentences there will give you a sense of urgency, and if you want some short sentences to give a sense of urgency at one point of the short story, that's all right. Our sentences will be long, but not long where you lose control. You must see a beginning and an ending with a complete thought. And our sentences must be meaningful. We're not just throwing words together. We said that before about our effective and efficient use of language. So our sentences must be meaningful. There must be effective and appropriate transition between sentences and paragraphs. Now, these words, however, on the other hand, similarly, these little connectives really help. They really help in connecting our sentences and our paragraphs. They help us to have a smooth flow. So I'm sure our teachers told you about these connectives. You can look up for yourselves some connectives, the connectives that will introduce a contrasting point, the connectives that will improve it in a similar point. We have several different kinds of connectives, and you will select to make everything very, very smooth. Now, subject and verbs must agree. This is really and truly a sore point. Subjects and verbs must agree. Agreement of verb and subject, this is usually brutalized in the examination. A singular subject will take a singular verb, and a plural subject will take a plural verb. Sometimes people get mixed up, and this concord is a problem not only in school, but out of school, sometimes with our adults. We have to correct that, and we have to pay attention. And when you're reading over, ensure that you check each verb to see. Check each verb. That's why we have to get our time and time management right. You check each verb to ensure that the verb agrees with the subject. Pronouns must agree with their antecedents. Pronouns must agree with their antecedents. What's antecedents? The antecedent is what comes before. The antecedent is what comes before. So if we say Jack and Jill, that's the antecedent. And if we're going to put a pronoun there, it will have to be they. We're talking about Jack and Jill. If Mary comes before, we will have to say she. If John comes before as the antecedent, we will have to say he. If we're talking about the cat, well, we'll have to say it. So, antecedent, that word there, is just telling us of the noun or nouns that precede. And this point class that I'm going to make here now is crucial. There must be consistency in the use of tense. There must be consistency in the use of tense. So, if we are writing our story in the past tense, every single verb must be a past tense verb. Every single verb must be a past tense verb. We must not mix our tenses. We'll be severely penalized. I am going to encourage you to write your story in the past tense. You can write a story in the present tense, but it's a little more difficult. But some people who can do that will do that for you get that sense of urgency. But I am going to encourage you to write your story in the past tense and check and ensure that each verb. Remember, class, what I'm going to do here with you students is the mark scheme that the examiner uses. This is the mark scheme that the examiner uses. So you have to adhere to it. There must be consistency in use of things. This two things that I've gone through here in this last part, the agreement of subject and verb and this consistency, very, very, very problematic at CSEC. And then overall, you get the accuracy of mechanics. So our spelling must be correct. As we say, our spelling must be correct. Our punctuation must be in order. Our capitals must be when we're supposed to have our capitals, and our full stop for when we're supposed to have our full stop. We have to remember those things. Our punctuation, our spelling, our question marks, our full stop. And moreover, our paragraphing. We must write in paragraphs. If we write from beginning to end without paragraphing, we're doomed. We'll get very low marks. So remember paragraphing. And one thing I am seeing with modern students now, they're skipping a line after each paragraph. You need not skip a line after each paragraph. You just go and indent. Do not skip a line. Do not desist from that. I'm seeing that creeping up all the time. All you need to do, go to the next line, you indent. And that indentation tells us that it's a new paragraph. So cut that out. I'm seeing too much of that. So we'll end here today, class.